Very good morning, students. Today we'll learn the chapter, the last lesson from a prose section written by Alphonse Daudet. Alphonse Daudet was a French novelist and short story writer. The last lesson is set in the days of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-1871, in which France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. In this story, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Prussian hands. Alphonse Daudet was born on 13th May 1840 in Nîmes and died on 16 December 1897 in Paris. He was a French novelist who obtained employment on Le Figaro under Cartier de Valence, an energetic editorship, and began to recognize in literary communities. He attended school in Lyon and started writing at the very beginning at the age of 14. Daudet also joined army to fight in the Franco-Prussian War. France's defeat had a profound impact and reflected in his stories. Theme of the chapter, the last lesson, is about patriotism, freedom of language, and the love for one's mother tongue are predominant in the story. The people of Alsace and Lorraine were denied the freedom to learn their own language by the Prussians. So the story leads to culture and language, hegemony of the imperial and colonial power, pathos of the likely language crisis, language and assets more so in time of crisis, fear, shame, and agony of losing freedom of learning. The story reflects upon the arrogance of the colonizer to forcefully take away the rights of those who are colonized. The last lesson stresses on the importance of education and the necessity to respect one's own language. The story draws attention to the unfair practice of linguistic chauvinism. It refers to an unreasonable pride in one's own language while disregarding all other languages as inferior. The Franco-Prussian War or Franco-German War, often referred to in France as the War of 1870, was a conflict between the Second French Empire and the German states of the Northern German Confederation, led by the Kingdom of Prussia, lasting from 19 July 1870 to 28 January 1871. The conflict was caused by Prussian ambitions to expand German unification and the French fears of the shift in the European balance of power that would result if the Prussians succeeded. Some historians argue that the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck deliberately provoked the French into declaring war on the Prussia in order to draw the independent South German states, Baden, Württemberg, Bavaria, and the Hesse-Darmstadt into an alliance with the Northern German Confederation dominated by Prussia, while others contend that Bismarck did not plan a thing and merely exploited the circumstances as they unfolded. In the story, the last lesson, we'll meet two important characters, Mr. Hamel and a friends. Mr. Hamel was a very strict teacher. Students were afraid of his iron ruler. He was very sincere and dedicated teacher who served for 40 long years in his service as a teacher to the village of Alsace city. He is presented as a traditional schoolmaster who always kept his terrible rule under his arm. But he was a transformed person after the order from Berlin, because he got the notice to vacate his place to make the space for new German teacher. He was totally broken. He remained sad during his final class. He changed his behavior and behaved rather very politely and patiently. When French was not able to say his lesson correctly, instead of scowling him, he just made him understand about the relevancy of learning the mother tongue. He preached everyone he presented in the class about that important things should never be postponed. Time flies very fast. He loved France and French from the core of his heart. That's the reason he was highly respected both by students and the villagers. Another most important character in the chapter, the last lesson, French, was a very young boy living in Algiers district of France. He had a layman such to studies. At the beginning, we find him feeling tempted to skip school. However, we also come to know his inner strength of character when he overcomes the temptation. We come to know his patriotism and love for his teacher after he comes to know about the sad news of the new order according to which teaching of French had to be replaced with German. He's shocked to know that that was Mr. Hamel's last lesson. We see him getting remorseful for having ignored learning French. He wants to learn all the French in just one period. He's very sad at the departure of his teacher. In this way, from a negligent schoolboy, he becomes a self-analyzing citizen. He turns out to be a character that grows matured in the course of this story. We find him mischievous and willing to go to school initially in the story, but later we got to know about his patriotism toward his language and his respect toward Mr. Hamel. Summary of the chapter, the last lesson. The story is set in the backdrop of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. France was defeated by Prussia, which was led by Bismarck. Prussia, that consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. The incident in the story had taken place in Algiers, the borders district of France. The Germany authorities issued an order to introduce German language as the only official recognized language of these districts, and henceforth it would be the medium instruction in all educational institutions. The story relates the pathetic condition of the French schoolmaster who has been asked to leave the place where he had spent 40 years of his life. It also brings out the remorse of the village people on never having given due importance to learn their mother tongue. The entire story is a first person narrative by an inhabitant of the village, Alsace, recounting a particular day when he was just a school going child. The initial shock on hearing the news and his regret on willing away his precious time in fruitless occupation are beautifully portrayed in this simple pagan narration, which is very aptly titled The Last Lesson. Story highlights the last day of French teacher Mr. Hamel, who gave his last lesson with utmost devotion. French. A playground with French realized for the first time how important French language is for him. Story highlight the human tendency to procrastinate and put things for tomorrow. The last French lesson taught by Hamel symbolized the loss of language, the loss of freedom for conclusion of the chapter, the last lesson. What I realized, it is not about the French-Prussian War. It is not about Monsieur Hamel. It is not about France. It is about all the students who don't take the school seriously and all the parents that are not keen to make them study.